Okay, everyone. So before I start in this lesson, I just want to congratulate you. You are now at some point, based on the knowledge that we currently have, we already have the basics or the basic knowledge that we can try to use when we are programming some projects or when we want to build some projects. And just one note, the next topic that we will be discussing will be more on control structures, which is going to be involving some logic in our application. So very often when we try to write code, we want to be performing certain actions for different conditions. So we can use conditional statements or different control structures in our code for us to be able to do this. Okay, so I have already prepared here a control structures.php, so at least we can see this in action. So control structures are the main core of any programming logic. This will be allowing our script to react differently depending on whatever is the instructions that we give it based on some of the scripts that we have written and the user input that will be allowing us to be able to handle different types of tasks that we are providing the application that we're building. So just have that in mind. We are going to be working with logic in this set of lessons that we will be having next. We did see some of this in action in some previous lessons that we have. If I'm not making a mistake, we did set up a very basic control structure like this. So we'll try to talk more and see more examples so that we can try to figure out how this is going to be implemented when we try to build our projects. I really did my best to avoid using control structures in some of the examples that I have shown you, so that at least you will not be overwhelmed too much as we try to work with some of the examples that we had in the previous lessons. But as I've mentioned, this is a very important topic that will be involved in building applications in any programming language. We have to understand how control structures are going to be implemented. So one thing to take note of when we are working with code, the computer will be reading this line by line. And we do know that code that we write, it's not going to be always in a linear fashion. And that is where PHP conditional statements or the control structures in any programming language comes in. We are given an option to decide. We have the ability to decide on what task, what will be executed depending on user input, depending on how we wrote our script. But just have that in mind. We will not just be having a linear fashion, or we will not just be working with our code and we will not be writing it just in a linear fashion. There will be some logic into it, and that's the ability to be able to decide if this is our tasking, what will happen, and then if not, then what will happen. So this is the same reason why I always tell students that programming is similar to life. We have the ability to make decisions when we write our code. We are given that chance to make options for making decisions, and similar with life, we do have a lot of decisions that we make, and it's a matter of what will be the consequences of those decisions. So that's something to take note of. We are not just going to be working with code in a linear fashion. And when it comes to control structures, this will be definitely something that you will encounter, especially when you're building some features for your application already. So let's say, for example, a login system. What will be the flow of the user experience when we're trying to log in, when we're trying to log out, when we're building a contact form, a sign up form, and how are we going to connect that to the database. So most of the time, this is definitely something, or this is definitely something that you will encounter in most programming languages. So let's look into some of those examples. And usually we do have two control structures in PHP. We have what we call conditional statements and control loops. So code will not just be in linear fashion. So if we try to look at some examples, if we have here in the previous example, we had a statement, and this is what we call an if statement. And we can see here, we have that if keyword, we have the function invocation operator, and then we have our code block operators. So let's put this in a multi-line comment just as a reference. And let me just go here and add a condition inside of the function invocation operator. So if we try to break that down, we do have a code block, or let's say code block from where code will be executed if condition is going to be true. So take note that the if statement is going to execute some code if one condition is true. So let's look into some examples here. So let's say I would want to have an if statement that will have some conditions from where we are going to check. Let's say I'm going to declare some variables here. Variable A is assigned the value of 5 and variable B is assigned the value of 3. And we want to go and print out some text, print out or end of if statement. And usually we can add comments so that we will be able to know where will be the start of a code block and the end of a code block. So in our case, especially this is going to be useful if you are writing a lot of code already. For now, that's not going to be that much of a big deal. However, when you're writing hundreds of lines of code, having some way to read through your code and be able to figure out where the statement that you have written ends and where it is started is definitely going to be helpful. So in our case, let's just try to echo out, print this out if the condition is true. So let's just have this one statement and we will be checking if, let's say, variable A that contains the value of 5 is greater than variable B. So if we know that 5 is greater than 3, so supposedly if we go back to our browser, what are we going to be expecting to be printed out? We know that this is true, that A is greater than 3. So we should be able to see the text on our browser. And that's what's currently happening right now. Print this out if the condition is true. So that's a very simple example of an if statement that will be allowing us to execute some line of code. So in this case, we are printing out some string data type. So we have this sentence, print this out if the condition is true, and we are able to print it out on the browser because this condition that we have inside of the function invocation operators, which is the opening and the closing parenthesis, is checking on whether this condition inside of our function invocation operator will be true, and then it will go through this code block, and if it's true, it will then be echoing this value of true. So that's just one example of an if statement. Let's go and let's say we want to, let's have, and usually when you are writing some logic in your application, you might want to go and write what we call pseudo code. And when it comes to pseudo code, that means what do you want to achieve? Usually we start with comments, and this is going to be in English human readable form. So let's say I would want to compare two values or that two values. Store those two values in two variables. Then print out the text. The variables, or let's say the variable A is equal to variable B. So that means we want to, we're trying to think as if we are communicating with the computer. We're giving it line by line instructions so that it will be clear that these are the things that we want to happen in the logic of the application that we're trying to work on. So we want to compare two values. We want to store those two values in two variables, print out the text strings. The variable is equal to variable B if the condition is true. So these are the three steps that we want to try to figure out. So the first one, we want to have two values. So let's say I would have 10 and 20. So let's have compare two values, and we want to have two values in two variables. So let's say C assign the value of 10 and D is assigned the value of 20. Then print out the text string, the variable A is equal to variable B if the condition is true. So let's go and work on creating our if statement, and let's have here $C, and instead of greater than symbol, we'll be using the equality operator, and we're going to check on whether the two will be having the same value or equal to each other. So we will, and then we want to go and print out the string text, the variable A is equal to variable let's use here B, and let's first try to make this true. So if C and D is going to be true, so let's have a, try to echo out here, echo out a line break. And now let's try to see what are we going to get. The variable A is equal to variable B. So that means this is end of second if statement. So statement. End of first example of if statement. End of second example of if statement. So now we are able to see this. However, if we do give it a value that is going to be false, we would see it's not going to be printed out. So now what would be happening if this is false? Of course, we won't be getting anything printed out on the screen. What we can do here is we can try to practice the concept of chain of conditions. That means we have an option to have an alternative. If, for example, this is not going to be true, this condition is not going to be true, then we will be having something else executed and be displayed on our browser. So we can try to implement here the second. So the first statement that we have is the if statement. So I think it's good that we go and try to have some sort of a heading here for the examples. So let's have H2 if statement examples. And let's echo that out. Then let's go and have if else statement. So we will work with if else statement examples. So in the if else statement, what we're trying to do here is that it will be executing some line of code. And I think we can try to go and put this down here, if else statement. So what we want to do here is that we want to execute some code if a condition is true, and then execute another line of code if the condition is false. So instead of having to end it in this line 39, our if statement, what we would want to do is to go and try to add an else statement code block that will be, so let's just change this to end of example of if else statement. So in here, we would want to print out the variable A is equal to variable B if the condition is true. Else, we want to print out here the variable A is not equal to variable B. And let's end that statement. So let's look at what will be happening. And we do see that the variable A is not equal to variable B is getting displayed on the browser. So this first statement is not true. We know that C is not equal to D. So the print statement is not going to be printed out. Instead, we print out the condition. When it is not equal to variable B, we will be printing out the else statement code block. And again, just to show a proof of concept, if both of them are equal, we should be able to see this line 38 print statement. The variable A is equal to variable B. And if they're not equal, so I'm just trying to switch the value of 20 and 10 here, and I'm putting it on the variable D now. We're still getting to print out the variable A is not equal to variable B. Now, another statement that I want to talk about when it comes to conditional statement is the if, else statement examples. So the else statement is usually used as a default value if multiple conditions were not fulfilled in our line of code. So that means this if else statement will be executing different codes for more than just two conditions. So that means we have here first condition, the second condition, is this true? And then if it's not true, then we print out the else statement. However, in this if else statement or statement, we will be executing the first line of code. If it is true, then it will no longer run through the else if statement and the else statement. But if this is false, it will go through the else if statement And again, this will no longer run through here. It stops here if the code here is true, but if it's false, it will then go to the else statement that we have here that will be executed if all of the conditions are false. So let's just go and try to declare some variable here so that we can try to, I just want to show you something here that you might be confused of. We know that this is an integer data type, and we did talk about the number strings, which will be string literal, but is numeric, string literal. We know that these are two different data types, right? That contains the value of 30 integer, and this one will be number strings, which will be 30. We know that because they're enclosed in double quotes. And what we can try to test here, I just want to go and have a condition that will be checking with the use of the strict equality operator or the identical operator. We talked about this in our previous lessons. Number strings, we did talk about that this is producing true, this is also producing true, but this is not producing true, right? That's going to be false. And we also talk about the strict equality operator. Let's see what will happen here. So let's have an echo that will say that the variables contain the same data types and equal values. Here we want to have an else if that will be using only the equality operator. So that means we would say here the two variables have equal values but not the same data type. And else, in here we can say that, let's have echo, the two variables does not have the same values and data type. So let's look at how this is going to work. So the two variables, this is not going to be true because we know the variables contain the same data types and equal values. We know that the values 30 integer and values 30 number strings are not true. So we're being strict with the use of the strict equality operator or the identical operator. So this is turning into false. Because if we want this to be the one to be executed, we'll have to turn this into a similar integer. So you would see we get the variables contain the same data type and equal values. The variables contain the same data types and equal values. So that's turning into true. But again, these are two different data types. Just have that in mind. And if you want to make sure that coercion will not be happening, type coercion will not be happening in whatever code that we're writing and we're checking for conditions, we can maximize the use of the strict or identical operators for comparison. Now here, we can see that we are only using the equality operator, so we can see that this is going to be coercing. If we try to var dump $e, and let's say we want to var dump this e plus $f, what are we going to get? We do get an integer 60, so the string is getting coerced to become a, what if we just say equal? What are we going to get? Boolean of true value, right? So we do get that Boolean true value, and just have in mind that it's when we try to add the two variables here, we're actually getting the value added. What if we say we want to var dump here, just for a little bit of exploration, and we say e plus $f, are we going to get into an error? Let's see. So we're actually not able to add them because this is automatically getting the value of false. So we're jumping to this else if statement. The two variables have equal values but not the same data type. But if I go and again change this to here, integer 60, the variables contain the same data types and equal values. That's why we're getting that integer 60. So I just wanted to at least explore that. And as I mentioned, just have that in mind. These are two different data types. That's why if you're using the equality operator, it will be proceeding to type coercion. And if you want to make sure that type coercion will not be happening, we can use the strict equality operator here, or the identical operators. And of course, if they are not the same values, and we get to the two variables does not have the same values and data type. So if I say this is just going to be still, I think this is still going to be the exact same values, or let's just say or data type. Okay, so that means even if we go and convert them to integer, it will still be producing the else statement. Code block will be the one that's going to be displayed. Okay, so I hope that you got the idea on how to maximize the use of the if, else if statement and the else statement. And I hope you also learned that these are two different data type, and how we can try to maximize the equality operator and the strict equality operator and the equality operator in some of your projects in the future. And you will be able to see how they can be implemented in your projects. Okay, so that's it for this lesson, everybody. You're doing great. So we haven't yet covered one more conditional statement, because sometimes having if, else statements can be sometimes really, especially if we're chaining a lot of conditions already, can be really hard to read. And sometimes a better way to do this will be with the use of the switch statement, and that's another topic that we will be tackling in the next lesson. So I know that this can be quite intimidating, the concept and the logic in behind how we can try to use the if, else statements in our project implementation. Hang in there, guys. You're doing great. Keep up the good work. So I'm sure you'll be able to further understand how this can be implemented as you try to build more projects. So thank you, and see you on our next lessons.